Let's take a quick look at Hexagon and how cool it is even after all these years. Hexagon, I don't think it has the best reputation, I think, only because it appears to be an app from way back in the day, and it appears to be that it hasn't had an update in many years, but it still works, and I think it works really well. It's a very easy, intuitive modeling application, and while you can use it to create 3D objects from scratch, I use it mainly to make quick changes to objects that I sent over from DAZ Studio. It's just very intuitive to learn. There are a lot of powerful tools in that app, and there's actually a very friendly man named Max Hancock. He has something called the Hexagon Toolbox. I'm going to link to that in the PDF that you'll get with this series. So he has listed all the very cool shortcuts and functions that you can use with Hexagon, and he's an avid user of this, and he shows you a little bit about what he's doing with it and how he's using this guide. So it's essentially a list of shortcuts that'll come in handy as you work with Hexagon, and this is all the kind of cool stuff that you can make with it. So thank you so much for doing that, Max. I really appreciate that, and I will go and link to his website and to this particular link in the PDF. There are actually two versions of Hexagon out there. One of them is 32-bit, and the beta version that was released in 2018 is 64-bit. So the difference between that is that the 64-bit version will let you handle larger files. So 32-bit always has that memory limit of around 4 gigabytes, slightly less actually, but the 64 gigabyte version doesn't have that limit. So just so that you know where and how to find it, in your install manager, you can have a look at Hexagon over here. So it's a product that you own by default, I guess. So you just type in Hexagon. You don't have to buy anything. It's a free product from DAZ. So you type in Hex or Hexagon, and I have mine installed already here, and I've got the public build 64-bit version. In order to find that public build, so the other one would be this one here, that's the regular version, but that's the 32-bit version. In order to find these ones with the yellow strap here, and also the one that says 64-bit, head over to your download filters up here and scroll down until you see the release channel tags, and then just tag the public build option here. As soon as you do that, you will see additional items appear in your install manager, and then select this one that I've already got installed here, Hexagon 2.5 public build 64-bit. That's how we get it going. And then I can do some cool stuff with it that I'll also show you where these options are. So, but essentially, if I wanted to do my pear-shaped thing again in Hexagon, I'm going to go and leave this slider that we've had manually imported here. I'm going to go and head over to File, Send to Hexagon. And if I do that, Hexagon is going to start up magically. It's also going to show me those news items here that I've always deselected, one of those things. And then I can go and see that I can work with my object here. So I go through the basics of the interface here. There is a nice channel that will show you more about Hexagon by Vladimir Shupin. I will also link to his channel in the description. So in order to move around the viewport, Alt, left click and drag will make that happen. That'll let us rotate around an object. Scrolling the mouse wheel will let us zoom in and out. And notice it'll do that wherever the mouse cursor is positioned. So if I put my cursor over here and then zoom in here, then it appears that my object is going off the center, but Hexagon is looking at where my mouse cursor is. So if I zoom out and then position that where I'd like to have a closer look at, then this is how I can do that. Alt and right click will let you pan the object around. And then Alt and the full stop button on your numpad will focus in on a selection, a bit like Control F in DAZ Studio. But in order to do that, we need to select an object first. So 3D applications are usually divided into something like object mode versus editing mode. That's how Blender thinks about this. And Hexagon is a little bit like that as well. We have these options here at the top left. And the first one here is called the select objects mode. So if we had multiple objects in our scene, which is important when we adjust clothing, because we're going to have the figure as well as an item of clothing, as well as all the other parts that come with our scene, we can select which one of these we'd actually like to work with. And then once we've done that, we have these other tools here. That means face selection. So this is like select a polygon. This is selecting an edge. This is selecting a vertex. And this one here is a combination of all of those. So you hover over whatever it is and that you'll be able to select. So selections, once again, very important when you're working with 3D applications. So I'm going to do this object selection thing first and select my sphere. That comes in with materials, by the way. And as soon as I do that, I can see that my wireframe is showing here. So that's quite nice. I'll also see that at the bottom right here, my sphere is selected. So this here is equivalent to the Scene tab in DAZ Studio. You'll have multiple objects here. At the bottom here, this is for the dynamic geometry. If you're making modeling changes, you can do those non-destructively in Hexagon. And then at the top right here, this is kind of the tools panel that'll show you properties of the current tool, of the current operation that you're doing. On the left hand side, we don't really have much, so you can close this down if you wanted to. You can just collapse these palettes if you want. I'm going to leave these open just in case, and I'm going to go over and change my selection to the point selection tool here. And then I'll go and Alt left click and drag in my viewport so that I can now go and select one of these many vertices in my scene. So anything then when I hover here, there's this little blue dot that appears, and if I go and left click on that, it'll get selected, and then that is the object I can work with. So my manipulator shows up as I'm used to it, and I can go and perform these operations now on this one selected point here. So left click and drag up, and that'll make that point move up or down. Control Z undoes that. Same with the red arrow or with the little triangle here. So left clicking and dragging will move that along 2 axes. So exactly like what we've learned already. Control Z undoes that. I might not want to move just one point. Usually organic changes look much better if you make them on multiple points, not just on one. But that's where Hexagon has something called soft selection. And it means that adjacent points will also be selected and can also be modified with a fall off. So for our sphere, that's kind of ideal. I'm going to go zoom out a little bit and use this here soft selection on the right. As soon as I click that, I can see that not only do I have my blue point, I also have some red points that go out from the center here. If I go and increase or decrease the radius, you can see that more points will appear. And if I do that, then my change that I'm going to make is going to appear on more than this one point. So if I go and left click and drag this up now, I can see that the whole top of my sphere is moving. And that's kind of nice. So that's how you can make really nice organic changes. There's also the softness, so I can change that independently. But I might just go and do this. And then I might go and disable soft selection and just go make this top here come out a little bit more. And maybe that's my pear-shaped change that I want to do in Hexagon here. And we're going to look into more options that we have with Hexagon. But, you know, that's the basic principle. Once I've made my change, notice that I haven't added or removed any polygons while I was here in Hexagon. I can't do that, but that'll destroy the geometry. And that means DAZ Studio can't bring this in anymore as a morph target. So we're going to have to make sure we don't add more subdivision or remove polygons here. Once I'm done with my change, I can head over to File, Send to DAZ Studio, and that is essentially the reverse of what we just had there. So click that. This is this beautiful integration back in DAZ Studio. If it doesn't open up, just go and switch to it. I can see a dialog that's popped up. Very, very convenient. And it says, what would you like to do? Create a morph is the default here, but I can also create a standalone prop. If I didn't want to integrate that into this item, I can go and create a prop of that. There's also material changes that you can make here. I'm just going to go and create a morph, and this lets me give it a name here. So morph name, I don't maybe want that to be Hexagon morph. I would like for that to be pair 2, just so that we can differentiate it from the other one. And then I'll go and say accept. That's done that. I didn't see an error message, so that's very good. I can see that under my morph section here, I now have the morph loader. This is what we had before. And I also have the Hexagon bridge with my pair 2 slider. And what do you know? I crank that up to the right and whoops, something happened there. I'm kind of glad it did happen, because if this happens to you as well, this means that the option to reverse deformations was not enabled, and it isn't actually by default. It's actually kind of very clever Hexagon. I will show you how to amend that. It is a setting that you have to enable in DAZ Studio actually for this option to come up, so no problem. Let's remove this. I'm kind of glad this went wrong. So if you had this and you think, hey, this is really not the morph that I wanted to make, I don't want this thing to change positions here, that's okay. You can go and delete this slider out if you don't want it anymore. So right click on this gray space here, put the parameter slider into edit mode, and then go and select this here, right click and say delete selected property. That will get rid of that morph slider. And we even lost the whole category here, which is cool. Disable the edit mode again. And let me show you what we need to do for that to be changeable. So under edit preferences, we have this item here called Bridges, and Hexagon is now in here that I've installed it. It also has the path to Hexagon. So when you run this for the first time, you might find that a file dialog comes up in which DAZ Studio is asking you, hey, where does Hexagon live here? And then you just direct it there and it'll remember this path. If you have multiple versions of Hexagon, this is where you can change that. But in the most important thing is under show options here. Basic is what we just had. We assume we don't deal with options, but really we do. So we want to switch this over to advanced, then hit apply and accept, and then try our luck again. Now when I go back to Hexagon, where my change is still intact, I can head over to File, Send to DAZ Studio again. And then when I now switch back to DAZ Studio, I will see a little options dialog pop up that reminds me of the morph loader that I've introduced you to in the previous video. So we have the same options here, but we have more of it as well. So there's a preset that I can choose. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to open this up, and there's now the property that I need to set. And this is pretty much like that for 90% of anything and everything that you bring back into DAZ Studio. You have to change the reverse deformations from no to yes. You can expand this as well. There are other options that you can apply here, but yes is usually fine. You hit accept, and then that means that DAZ Studio can reverse calculate any deformations that the object may have already had, so that it can isolate your change from whatever other thing might have been applied. In my case, it was the transformation. So my sphere wasn't in the middle of the scene. It was slightly further to the right offset. On characters, it'll be that they're not the base figure, that there might be a custom character that you've applied a morph to already. So that's a morph target on top of a morph target. And this option, reverse deformations, will tell DAZ Studio, hey, isolate that from the thing that we want to turn into a slider. So now we have this hexagon morph here. I forgot to name it, but you know that option exists as well. I can left click and drag that now, and the sphere will remain in the same spot. So that is kind of cool. Reverse deformations. Let's remember that. So that was a sphere, but that doesn't really help us with George's clothing. So let's go and turn our attention to that next. I might go and make the sphere invisible here and bring George back. In fact, with Control, clicking on his eyeball icon so that everything comes back with George. And perhaps I either want to make a change to the outfit, maybe I want to fix some poke through, or maybe I want to do something like make his legs longer or his arms longer or something like that. I will try to make his legs longer, like the trouser legs longer. So I'll go and select George, and parented to him are these two clothing items. So this is important to remember. Anything that is parented to George will also now end up in Hexagon. In fact, in Hexagon, so that I don't end up with multiple items here, let me go and grab my sphere and just delete it because I don't really need it anymore. There we go. You could alternatively close Hexagon down and open it again. It doesn't matter. So now we go and say File, Send to Hexagon. This will take a little bit longer, but in Hexagon, we're now going to see George and his two items, and we're going to see George in the pose. So watch out for that. I'm not entirely sure why George's top doesn't look exactly like in DAZ Studio, but then again, it's not a rendered viewport, so maybe I did apply a shader and then change it to black. I really don't remember. I just know that in here, this looks kind of plain, and we have that camel pattern on the bottom, and we have the camel pattern on the top and the bottom in Hexagon. So small inconsistency there. Let's not worry about it. We do see more poke through in Hexagon now, but that's only because the smoothing modifier that is active inside DAZ Studio doesn't work inside here. So one thing to remember that. Sometimes you see poke through where there isn't any, but if you were to change this now, you can be sure it definitely isn't there in DAZ Studio. So one of those things, if I wanted to change this poke through here on the top, I would go and select it first, the t-shirt, then zoom into that area and change this to face selection, and maybe go and just grab these two faces here and just very gently move them out. This is something I believe we have talked about this in DAZ Studio. See the rotation of the manipulator? It faces where the world is pointing up, down, left, and right. But that's no good if I wanted to move this polygon or a few polygons on the side outwards facing the direction of the normal. So I want to really have something that goes this way, but currently my manipulator doesn't point that way. Thankfully, Hexagon lets us change that over here at the top left. If we change the selection from world to selection, then watch what happens to the manipulator. It now gives us exactly what we're looking for. So selection versus world versus bounding box. Those are the options that we have here. Usually world versus selection works really well. So I'll change this to selection, and then I could go and left click and drag this out, and thereby avoiding that little bit of poke through. And if I wanted to add soft selection to that, that's also possible. Control Z undoes that. We have poke through again. Let's go and enable soft selection. The selection area might be wider than I want, so I can see that this whole area would now be moved. If I go and left click and drag this, that's more than I really want to move. So I'll go and turn that down, the selection radius here, until the red dots are kind of in the area that I want influenced. And now I'll just go and move that out a little bit. Poke through has been combated, like so. Perfect. Let me show you something else that we can do as part of this morph. So if there's other parts, just go around them and do the same thing. So now these selections here, these sections, you can probably do the same thing. Just grab them and then move that bit out. There, poke through is history. And you just go around and just fix poke through this way. And all of these little changes that you make to this geometry, to George's top, we can use and dial in as a morph target when we need it. Pull this up a little bit, pull this up. You can do as much or as little as you want, be as granular with it as you want. The navigation really grows on you, and it's just such a handy tool to have this for small fixes without having to be a professional modeler, Maybe that's my top done now, and I'm going to go and send these changes for the top back to DAZ Studio. So that happens by going back to object mode. With the t-shirt selected here, I'll head over to File, Send to DAZ Studio. And this has to happen item by item. So if I go into DAZ Studio now, it'll say create a morph, and this is now just for the t-shirt here. Expand that here so you can see it. I'm going to go and say no preset, create a morph. I want to go and reverse the deformations for sure. And in here, I'm also going to give it a name. So instead of hexagon morph, I'll go and double click into this and say this is now shirt poke, just so that I remember what that was, and hit accept. And that is now created successfully. So in order to dial this in, we had the smoothing modifier, so we don't actually see that much of a change. But in order to dial this in, I have to go and select my t-shirt now. And under the morph section, I have the shirt poke morph. If I go and enable that, you can see that there's a change that I've made with hexagon. And now the smoothing modifier doesn't have to work quite that hard. There. I can go and literally switch back to hexagon now and make another change to another item. That's also quite handy. So I'm going to try and give his trousers a slightly longer leg. So I just make it just above the knee, just make him a little bit longer, like cargo shorts, that sort of thing. So in order to do that, I'll go into object selection mode, select the pants from here, and then I will go and try, I'll do this leg by leg. So they're not symmetrical, I don't think. So I'm going to go and use my edge selection tool now, like so. And then I'll go and maybe select this part of the trouser leg here, something at the bottom. Not sure why I can't select that. That's interesting. Oh, do you know what? It's not reacting because I haven't accepted the previous step. So I need to go back to the t-shirt here and quickly hit apply or accept, so that this operation where I've made the last change just gets locked in. I'm so sorry, I forget this every time. One of those things. So once you've done that, if you're ever in this situation and you think, hey, I've changed to another item and my selection just isn't working, do that. If I now go back to the pants, now I can see that my edges show up here. Whew, kind of glad this happened to me while I'm explaining this to you. So let's pick one of the bottom seams here, just one edge, like something like this, and with that I can now tell hexagon to go and do a loop selection. So follow this edge along as long as you can. So that'll be the whole trouser leg, and that is up here with this loop action here. The letter L will also be a shortcut to that. If I do that, you can see that the whole ring of the trouser leg's now selected. And my soft selection is still on, so that's kind of what I want. I can go and left click and drag and pull this down and just make that trouser leg a little longer. I can probably also make that a little, scale that in a little bit. I can move that in line with his leg here. It doesn't have to be something drastic, but you can see how easy you can make longer sleeves or longer skirts. with the soft selection, you can see that the polygons here, they're distorting. So that'll probably have an effect on the shader. The more these distort, the more the texture on that will distort as well. It's probably not going to be that noticeable in our camo pattern, but to alleviate that, go back and just increase the soft selection to somewhere like at the top here. Let's go do that. So then this whole area is going to be affected. Make sure you don't select the other trouser leg. So that's not what we want to do really. But yeah, this is going to be okay. Maybe just to here. To scale the trouser leg in, we can either use a scale manipulator here, or we can just use the universal one, like the one that we used to. This, I think I was on the translate manipulator. So this is translate here, this is rotate, this is scale, and this is the universal manipulator. So yeah, that's that. So just the yellow cube in the middle just makes this a little narrower. Oh, that's not actually going to work because of this knobbly leg here, unless we want to go and pull that out as well. Don't know. Maybe we'll do that. Do this, go and change this to face selection, grab that and just pull that out a tad. There we go. That's one leg done. Let's go do the other one. Let's go back to edge selection. And you'll be flying around in this in no time. L to make that loop here. Go left click and drag that down. Make that a little narrow down here. And then see if we have any other poke through. Oh yeah, so this poke through here on his crotch, we had that. That's probably something that the smoothing modifier cured. But while we're here, we might as well do that. Face selection. Pick that up, just pull that out a little bit. Whoops, that might not work so well. Yeah, I think I might just leave that and let the smoothing modifier in DAZ Studio deal with that. But there we go. That's the trouser legs a little bit longer. The other part of the poke through we've already fixed. And now, same thing as before, make sure you say accept here. You don't really see it change, but I guess it is important to kind of finalize that operation. Then we head over to File, Send to DAZ Studio, where we now get to import this as another morph on the pants. So once again, open up, and then in here, very important, reverse deformations, left click it, then right click it and hit yes. And we can also give it a name. So I'm going to call that leg length. Accept. Hit OK. And then on our trousers here, we can see leg length, and that left click and drag will go and make his legs longer. Haha. And crotch, yeah, magically fixed by the smoothing modifier. So all these technologies working in tandem here. We've given George some longer trousers. I'm kind of happy about this. Oh yes, and then one more thing, just so that we don't forget, if you wanted to rename that, or if you wanted to make sure this doesn't go into the negative to give them, weirdo shorts, you can just click on this little gear icon and disable the fact that this can go into the negative by hitting that to 0. Hit accept, and now we have a morph. Perfect. Poke through has been sorted with an external tool like Hexagon. Do you remember in the previous episode where I talked to you about selection sets? I don't know why I'm now thinking about this. If we do have selection sets, that was on the Tool Settings tab with the Geometry Editor enabled, and that was also on George now. Do you remember these things here, the back poke and the hip poke and these things? We've disabled all these things. These will be saved with your scene, but the visibility won't come back invisible. That's just something to keep in mind. If you go and save the scene, or even as a sub-scene, I might actually do that just as a demonstration purpose here, because I totally forgot to mention that. If I go to my DAZ scenes in my new project, and I will go and save this out as a scene subset, kind of important to remember, George Demo, I'll call him. I will just save George, like so. It'll only take a second. The selection sets will be saved, of course. So if I go and remove George from here now and go and bring him back with George Demo, I can go and merge him into the scene. He'll come back at the exact same space there. But the problem is his poke through appears to be back. So this is something I should have really mentioned that in the previous episode. But yeah, the poke through, the selection sets will be saved, but they're not invisible when you load the scene. So all you need to do is essentially go back into the Tool Settings tab with the Geometry Editor enabled, and then just go and set them to invisible. So if I'm on George with the Geometry Editor under Tool Settings, they are invisible. Oh, how interesting. That is something I didn't even know. Let's go make a new scene. Maybe it is something that DAZ Studio has remembered under the hood. So I could have sworn that the visibility isn't actually saved with those things. Interesting, interesting. Let's do that. Brand new scene. Go and load my George demo here. That is fascinating. Here's George, and I still can't see any poke through. So maybe it's a bug that's been fixed. Hey, that would be, no, there we go. Haha, okay, fine. So here, this is the expected behavior now. So I'm loading him back in a new scene, and the selection sets are now visible again. So this is just something that isn't saved in DAZ Studio. Just in case you ever do fix something poke through wise with scene selections and you think, hey, I could have sworn I fixed that. You have. It's just you have to manually turn these into invisible again. It's one of those things. If ever I find out how to fix it, and I will let you know. Maybe there's just a tick box that we need to tick in order to do that in saving. This was all about Hexagon, and I encourage you to explore. There's so much that it has to offer. There's Vladimir Shupin's channel that'll explain how to use Hexagon in modeling. There's another Hexagon channel that DAZ run that has all these little demo videos about functions that Hexagon has. That's also well worth checking out. I'll put that in the PDF as well. And then of course there's Max Hancock's wonderful Hexagon toolbox that I'll also link to. Have fun exploring it. I think it's really worth taking a look at, because I think it's just so easy to make quick changes to items that are not quite working as they should. And Hexagon is a free tool that is so well integrated in DAZ Studios, well worth exploring, even in 2022 and beyond.